Great. Thank you, President Ryan. Thank you both for the chance to be here today and for providing us the opportunity to contribute empirical analysis to this very important decision. Thank you, of course, to the board for the chance to share some of what we have learned. And I want to very much thank Vice Provost Farmer, who has been a tremendous collaborator and has provided profound insight as part of our working group. I thought what I might do is just speak for a few minutes about our process in approaching this analysis. I think largely reinforce what President Ryan has already shared as the main results, and then ask Vice Provost Farmer if he's willing to talk about in a little more detail some of the trends we've seen in applications and enrollments since the start of test optional. So process-wise, we were very fortunate to partner with many within the university and externally to assemble a very rich amount of data on our applicants. And that includes both readily observed measures from students' applications to the university, their high school GPAs, their college entrance exam scores, high school context information, as well as information, of course, of their performance when they're at their university, their courses they take, the grades they receive, the degrees they earn, and to a limited extent, some measures of non-academic engagement, participation in student organizations, leadership roles, and so on. We were also tremendously fortunate, as President Ryan alluded, to have the collaboration of the Commonwealth Department of Education, which very generously provided individual data for our public high school applicants on their standards of learning exams. So we have multiple measures of standardized academic assessments. For the pre-test optional cohorts, those applying through the fall of 2020, we observe SAT or ACT scores for all students, all applicants, because it was a requirement at the time. From the application cohorts 2021 and forward, we observe SAT and ACT scores for students who submitted them to the university. I will come back to this. There is a group of students who submitted their scores, but asked that they not be considered in the admissions process. That creates some analytic opportunities for us that I will speak to. And then for virtually all Virginia public high school students, both pre-test optional and post-test optional, we're able to observe that alternate standardized academic assessment measure, their performance on the Virginia Standards of Learning exams. Our primary question of interest when we combine that data on students from their applications and the data on students' primarily academic performance at the university is what do we learn from different measures that are observable during the application phase as it is predictive of largely students' academic success here. I'd like to begin by observing that many factors contribute to students' academic performance at the institution, many of which we are not able to observe in our analysis. There are components of the first year application process, essays, recommendation letters, for instance, that in the time we had are just computationally prohibitive to translate into data. And yet, I imagine Vice Provost Farmer can speak to much better than me, there is information in essays and recommendation letters that I'm sure admissions readers are gleaning that is predictive of student engagement and performance at the university. So there are factors in the application that affect, that are perhaps predictive of how students do that we can observe. And of course, there's many aspects of what happens to students and the choices students make when they are here that affects their academic performance that may be independent of what we can observe in the applications. I stress that because with all of the measures that we can observe, we're able to explain less than half of the variation in student outcomes. Our belief is that that very strongly reinforces the tremendously time-intensive work of holistic review and admissions that our colleagues in enrollment admissions do. Neither test scores nor GPA nor any other measure is deterministic about student performance at the university. So that, I think, is one key insight. I will reinforce a point that President Ryan made. Controlling for other readily observed measures, high school GPA, some information about school context, some information about students, like whether they are the first in their family to go to college. Standardized measures of academic achievement are predictive of academic performance at the institution. A way to say that a little bit more simply is that students who score higher on measures of standardized measures of academic assessment that they take during high school, on average, perform higher in, say, their first year courses than students who score lower on those assessments. I do want to stress the on average nature of that. It is also the case that because many factors affect how students do at the university, there is substantial variation within a given score level. We have students who score tremendously high on measures of academic assessment who may have lower GPAs at the university, and the reverse is true. We have students who, on the measures we can observe coming out of high school, may not have performed as well, who are stellar academic students at the university. What we find when we look at explaining the total variation that we can explain in student academic performance, I mentioned a moment ago that with everything we can put into the model, we're explaining less than half of the variation. When we include standardized measures of academic assessment, we increase the amount of variation we can explain in the range of 10 to 20%. That depends on the outcome. That is true both for the SATs and the ACTs. It's also true for the Virginia SOLs. We get about the same, for our in-state public high school students. We, of course, don't observe the SOLs or their equivalent for students applying from other states. But what that means is we're obtaining about the same predictive information from different forms of standardized academic assessment, which in our belief reinforces the value, as President Ryan articulated, of exploring the possibility of text-flexible approaches through which students could provide different forms of academic information. I will make one other quick observation. I'm, of course, I'm very happy to and eager to answer your questions to the best of my ability. Before I turn it over to Vice Provost Farmer to talk a bit about our enrollment trends and matriculation trends, I did want to speak to a concern that some of you might have seen arise with an analysis of the Dartmouth College test optional policy. And in the Dartmouth context, one of the concerns was that students from first generation backgrounds, for instance, with higher scores, were not submitting them when it might have been to their benefit to do so. And this gets to that population that I alluded to a few minutes ago. There's a subset of students who we observe scores for who ask that they not be considered in the admissions process. But we still know we have a population of students who submitted scores, some of whom had them considered in admissions and some who didn't. And we observe no difference by first generation status, for instance, in whether students have their scores considered at a given score level. So it does not appear that a concern that has arisen in other institutions is true at UVA. We see consistent submission decisions for students, both first gen and non-first gen, across the score distribution. Again, I'm very happy to elaborate on anything I've shared to answer your questions, but I'd like to first, if I can, just give Vice Provost Farmer an opportunity to describe some of the trends we've seen in application and enrollment.